Hey guys, I hope I find everybody in good spirits on this nice snowy spring day. No better way to enjoy that type of weather than to curl up with a nice cup of hot cocoa, settle up next to a fire, and talk about some Global 9 content. So, where we last left off, we were talking about the age of exploration and these explorers going all over the world, trying to get to the Americas, even though they thought they were actually trying to get to China or to India, or that they were sailing around the coast of Africa and uncovering all of these new trade routes. But what we're going to focus on now is the impact that the people living in these areas are going to have to deal with as a result of Europeans interacting with them for the first time. So we're going to specifically look at what's going on in the Americas prior to the Europeans and then connect that into what happens when the Europeans start interacting with the American. So guys, the first civilization that we're going to look at in the Americas is a group known as the Olmecs. Now, most people know about the Mayas, the Incas, and the Aztecs. They are the ones that have the most kind of fame and historical notoriety. But the first of the civilizations that actually emerged were the Olmecs in modern day Central America. So, guys, if you're thinking about Central America, you'd be thinking like modern day Mexico, Honduras, Belize, Guatemala. So, anyways, so they were there in the BCs, right? So they're there 1,000 years before the Europeans ever show up. And the Europeans show up with this very ethnocentric view of themselves, thinking that anyone in the Americas is going to be very, barbaric and that they're going to be very archaic with what they have. But the reality was that they actually have beautiful, beautiful cities, hundreds of thousands of people living there, and they have very advanced religions. Now, the one thing that always leads to a problem with the Europeans when they interact with quote unquote barbaric people is that they automatically view that if you're not Christian, you're barbaric. No matter how advanced your culture is, no matter what you're doing, you are barbaric because you are not Christian. And then they have this belief that it's their responsibility to convert the non Christians to the Christians. Um, so as a result, right away, there's this inferiority on top of the fact that the Europeans are going to have, better weapons and a little bit better technology. But the reality was, the civilizations in America were very advanced, very developed, and throughout this video, we're going to see different examples and some structures that they built that rivaled or in fact superior to that of the Europeans. So guys, from the Olmecs, we're going to see a couple of different civilizations emerge and really grow to really some historical prominence with the different things that they're able to come up with. So one of the first and probably most famous is going to be the Mayas. So the Mayas, located in modern day Mexico, specifically the Yucatan Peninsula, and if anyone's ever gone on vacation to Cancun, that's really where we're looking at kind of a lot of the Mayan culture. So when we start talking about the Mayans, let's look at just some of the key things that they're really kind of famous for, almost known for. Number one, all of the religions in the Americas, okay, Central America and South America, North America as well, they're all polytheistic, okay? So they all believe in many different gods, and at the center of all of their cities are these massive structures dedicated to the gods. Now, guys, you're probably going to hear some different rumors about what happened on top of these religious centers, and all the rumors are true. They all believed and practiced in ritual sacrifice. And it was the idea that the gods needed to be happy. So, just the same way that we talked about in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, that everything revolved around the gods, and if bad things were happening, it was because of the gods. That was the same mentality that was shared within the Mesoamerican civilizations. So, this notion that gods had to be happy, and if they weren't, you needed to fix that. And in the Mayan culture, the Aztec culture, and the Inca culture, the major way that you can make sure that the gods were happy was to give them the ultimate gift, and that was human sacrifice. Now, everyone's going to automatically believe that the minute that you hear human sacrifice, it's the notion that the civilizations were barbaric, right? Like how could they sacrifice people? That's just not right. It's murder. And I don't necessarily disagree with you guys on that. with the exceptions of it's just simply what they believed in. And if it's something that you grow up believing, then it's something that you just simply accept as being part of your culture. Again, think of some of the things that we believe in. You know, the tooth fairy is going to walk around and give you $1 for your, for missing teeth, or that the Easter bunny hops around and leaves Easter baskets. And there's just some things that we grew up in that we believe. Now, obviously, we've grown out of those as we've gotten older. But in the Mayan culture or the Aztec culture, the idea of human sacrifice to please the gods was something that was naturally ingrained. But that does not make them barbaric, and it does not make them unsophisticated. As you guys can see on the slide, you had a very strict social culture. People had jobs, skilled artisans. You had your farmers. Everyone had kind of their social role to make the civilization run harmoniously. And we're talking about that it survived for over 600 years. So we're not just talking about a civilization that just kind of emerged for a couple of generations and then disappeared. When we're talking about 6 centuries, we're talking about a group of people that clearly have a well-organized, maintained social dynamic that allows it to survive for centuries. Among some of the cooler inventions that they had, obviously they had their own language, which was unique. As you guys can see, though, it's a hieroglyphic language. So if you remember the idea of a glyph being a symbol, so it wasn't an alphabet-based language like the Europeans would have, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that the Mayas, they had a very detailed record-keeping system. They were able to keep their own histories, transactions, and things like that, which we all identify as being parts of a major civilization. Besides that, probably the most famous part that the Mayas come up with is the idea of their calendar. And everybody automatically associates with the Mayan calendar the idea that, oh, it's the end of the world. Now, obviously, you guys would have been way younger. I mean, you would have only been 5 or 6 years old. But in 2012, it was this belief that the world was coming to an end because the Mayan calendar was running out. As you guys can see the date down there, December 23rd, 2012. I remember being in school. I remember we were teaching, and I had a couple of kids who were convinced like this was it. This was the end of the world. And they were actually in my class, and I remember just sitting out, like they were staring out of the window, and they were like, "Oh my God, it's gonna come to an end." And I'm like, "Guys, we're gonna be okay." And then as it passed through and we were fine, everyone was like, "Oh, I guess that's okay." Because the way that it works, guys, is the Mayan calendar, it simply comes to an end, and then it just starts over again. So it's not as though like it's the end of the world as everybody predicted. But the cool thing is, if you look at it, their calendar is almost spot on to our calendar today. With the 365 days, the way that they divvy it up into the 18 months is a little bit different than ours with 20 days. But the fact that they know and understand so much astronomy, that's really what sets the Mayas apart from the Europeans and really from any other civilization, was that they understood the orbits and the movement of the sun and the movement of the moon, because so much of their religion depended upon understanding the gods and understanding, most importantly, the sun god. So based upon their religious devotion and understanding, they actually then made all of these great understandings and uncoverings to modern day astronomy, which we still use today. So a cool thing you guys could do is if you ever get a chance to go to Mexico on vacation, specifically if you're hanging out in the Yucatan going to Cancun, which is obviously a pretty big tour destination, you can actually go and visit Mayan ruin sites. They're amazingly preserved. Obviously, the photos that you're looking at, those are all examples from Mayan ruins that you can go check out. I remember there was a young aspiring social studies teacher who was in Cancun with some of his friends on spring break, and he decided that instead of hanging out at the beach and windsurfing, that he was going to jump on a bus and go check out the Mayan ruins. Now, all of his friends laughed at him, but it was one of the coolest things that that person had done. And you guys might guess who that person might be. Yeah, yours truly. But it really was kind of one of those cool things that it's just something that you'll kind of remember, and it's awe-inspiring when you think about a civilization that lived 1,500 years ago. The structures that they built are incredible, and the fact that you can still go see them and walk on them is really kind of cool. So something you guys should think about if you ever get a chance to go hang out in Mexico, specifically in Cancun. Take a day trip, go check out the Mayan ruins. So the weird thing with the Mayas was the fact, though, that they just kind of disappeared. There was no invasion. There's no records of any crazy war. There were no European conquistadors. They kind of disappeared, which I think is a little bit of the myth and the lore of the Mayans and this belief of their doomsday calendars, etc. But the next civilization that we're going to look at in Central America is going to be the Aztecs. Now, guys, the Aztecs are obviously the most I would argue and say the most famous because they're the most well known for their warlike structure. The fact that they were they were the warriors, they were the bad guys on the block. You didn't mess with the Aztecs. They had tons of gold, they had tons of riches, but probably their biggest claim to historical fame is the fact of the amount of human sacrifice that they used to please the gods. I think that's where most people, if you were to ask them, tell me one thing that you know about the Aztecs, it's probably going to be about the human sacrifice. So what we'll do is that we're going to look at more of Aztec culture rather than just simply look at them as being a bunch of murderers or people that were just constantly doing human sacrifice. Look at what their culture was really about. And I have a bunch of video that I want you guys to watch on the Aztecs specifically. So you'll see the YouTube links. You can't click on them through the video, but I will post them on Google Classroom, and I do want you to watch them. It's going to help you understand this culture a little bit more. So if we're to look at a map, we're going to find the Aztec civilization a little bit more north of the Mayas, that they're going to be more in what we would consider to be central Mexico. In fact, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, which we'll look at momentarily, is actually the modern day Mexico City. So there's a lot of connection between the modern day country of Mexico and the Aztec civilization within its roots. But again, guys, if you look at just the slide, we're talking about a lot of the same things. So it's ruled by an emperor, it's got a successful economy, again, reinforcing the idea that they're all polytheistic. But this civilization is going to have great wealth. It's going to have all sorts of little subtle nuances that we would look at any civilization and say that's a thriving, successful civilization. So when the Europeans showed up there with, again, this very Eurocentric, ethnocentric view that the Europeans were superior and the Aztecs were nothing but barbaric, that's the furthest thing from the truth. They had a very successful, thriving civilization. Just the one thing that the Europeans couldn't get over was, number one, the fact that the Aztecs had an absurd amount of gold, and that they were one of the richest, wealthiest civilizations in Central America. And the fact that they were performing ritual sacrifice was something that the Europeans could not get over, and as a result, really kind of established the sense of the Europeans being superior and the Aztecs being inferior. So, guys, that city that I mentioned, Tenochtitlan, so that's the capital of the Aztec world. Guys, check this out. They built it in the middle of a lake. So when we talk about, barbaric civilizations, I picture the idea of, and not, again, not to insult the Neolithics or the Paleolithics of man walking around with very primitive weapons and living in caves, and kind of just barely surviving. When we look at the Aztecs, I mean, how do you build that? Like, that's incredible that they're connecting causeways and building roads, all on these giant chinapas to make a very successful city with huge, massive temples. The streets are clean. There's tons of trade. There's palaces. Like, that's an amazing feat that they were able to take their environment, modify it with the engineering prowess to create this incredible city that was the greatest in all of the Americas: South America, Central America, North America. Tenochtitlan was the crown jewel of the Americas, and when that was discovered by the Spanish, rather than really appreciating what the Aztecs had created, the Spanish conquistadors, Hernan Cortez, was really thinking like, man, how can I loot this place? How can I take all of this wealth and benefit myself? Because again, they don't care about the Aztec people. They're only in it for themselves. But again, like, life in the Aztec civilization really was something more than just human sacrifice and going to war. So as I mentioned to you guys, so the destruction of the Aztecs. Now, I want to first pause this and say, A lot of the things that you're going to watch in the video are going to go into more depth about the really cool things that were going on in the Aztec world. So again, please make sure you guys watch the videos. Don't just bypass them. Make sure you watch them. I'm going to give you plenty of time for this project that you're going to do. So take some time, watch those things. It's going to help you understand. All right, so the destruction of the Aztecs, essentially when the Spanish, the conquistador, Hernan Cortez, remember, when we talk about the idea of a conquistador, we are talking about a conqueror, okay? They're not coming to befriend the Aztecs, even though that's the way that they kind of do it, is that they, quote-unquote, befriend the Aztecs, and then they take them over. But what ends up happening is that Hernan Cortez befriends Montezuma, who was the emperor of the Aztecs, basically at gunpoint forces Montezuma to turn over a lot of the Aztec gold. The Aztec people are gonna, go against Montezuma, calling him a traitor, which essentially he was, but he was doing it at knife point. So really, what are you gonna do? And then Cortez is going to leave. He flees Tenochtitlan, gets out of the Aztec world, sails across the Atlantic Ocean back to Europe with all this gold. And then 6 months later, he's going to come back with more men. But what he realizes is that the Aztec population, guys, we're talking about millions of people. The Aztec population was wiped out. And it's not because of bullets. There's no way the Spanish, okay, guys, if we're talking even a couple hundred soldiers, right? Let's say that we're walking in there with 1,000 soldiers trying to take on the Aztecs, who had really impressive weapons. Their weapons were made of obsidian, which were this crazy sharp glass that was really tough. They could fight, and 1,000 men, even with guns, were not going to kill and take over the Aztec world. Again, remember, we're talking about rifles that were single-shot rifles that you might be able to get off 2 shots in a minute. Eventually, you're going to run out of bullets. There's no way the Europeans could have done this. So what wiped out the Aztecs? Guys, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, it's disease. Europeans in itself, European cities were petri dishes of bacteria. But the thing that happens when you live in that environment, your body develops immunities to a lot of these different diseases. Well, the Americans had never had exposure to any of these diseases. So when smallpox hit in the Aztec civilization, it's going to wipe out the Aztec people. So all of a sudden, Cortez comes back and it's like, whoa, where is everybody? This is way, way easier than I anticipated. And the reason was the thing that he left the first time when they took off with the gold, he left behind the disease. And the disease is really what's going to take down the Aztec world, not Cortez, not Cortez's soldiers, no amount of bullets or cannon fire, but again, it's going to be the disease that wipes out the Aztecs. And then Cortez is simply there to pick up the pieces. So the last and the final of the civilizations that we're going to look at is going to be the Inca Empire. Now, one of the things that's unique about the Inca Empire, as you guys can see on the next slide, is that it's going to be located in South America. So located on the west coast of South America, the Incas are going to be found in the Andes Mountains. Now, guys, what's unique about the Andes Mountains is it's the tallest mountain range in the Western Hemisphere. Some geologists argue that there's points in the Andes Mountains that are actually higher than Mount Everest, and all of that gets into some type of weird, below sea, above sea level thing that's way out of my pay grade. But what we can recognize or take away from that argument is that the Andes Mountains are a huge, huge mountain range, and the Incas are going to be able to settle and have a very successful, thriving civilization within this giant mountain range. So guys, as mentioned before, the Aztecs, the Mayas, and the Incas, they're all going to share a lot in common with each other. So as you guys can see on the slide, again, we're talking about a polytheistic civilization. We're talking about another successful trading civilization ruled by an emperor. So there's a lot in common with all 3 of these civilizations. But again, we're going to look at some things that differentiate each other between them and what makes them unique. I would argue that when most people were asked about the Inca civilization, one of the things that they're going to first talk about is this idea of terrace farming. So guys, what terrace farming was is this unique ability for the Inca people to create sustainable, fertile soil in the mountains. Obviously, guys, we've talked a lot about this the entire year about challenges with geography, and we always talk about mountains as being this great barrier or defense, natural defense position for people. But one of the negatives we always talk about is a lack of fertile soil and the fact that if you can't grow crops, your civilization is not going to survive. So what the Inca people did is that they carved basically steps into the mountainside, and they were able to put soil on top of these steps, and that they found food and seeds that were able to grow in that environment, in that climate, and they successfully problem solved a natural environmental challenge, and they overcame it. Historians like to use this idea of adapting to their surroundings or adapting to their environment, where the Incas were able to take a challenge and they were able to problem solve through it and then successfully modify the environment to best suit them. Guys, another challenge that would be faced in the civilization, besides trying to set up your food situation, is then also being able to communicate, being able to move armies. Remember, one of the most famous things that the Roman Empire did is that they set up their road system. Remember that we have that saying that all roads lead to Rome. Well, I would actually argue and say that the Inca road system was far more impressive than the Roman road system. So we're talking about the Inca road system had over 25,000 miles worth of road. Guys, put that in the context. Going from New York City to San Francisco, so across the United States, is somewhere over 3,000 miles. So like 3,100, 3,200 miles, give or take. So the Inca made 8 times that amount of road in the highest mountain range in the Western Hemisphere. So again, when people are hating on the Europeans, when they're hating on people in the Americas, calling them barbaric or calling them unsophisticated or unadvanced or whatever adjective they wanted to use to describe them, all of these inventions that we see and all these engineering marvels that were created in the Americas prior to the Europeans getting there show a very advanced culture that should have been appreciated rather than systematically destroyed. Now, my personal favorite, one of the things that I'm hoping to at some point in my life to get to, is these great Inca urban centers. You guys can see the image that we have here is Machu Picchu. Now, Machu Picchu was basically a summer getaway city for the Inca elite. But guys, the fact that they're building these cities on top of mountains is absolutely incredible. It really was an homage to the engineering abilities that they had, the vision that they had, and just kind of this unique thing that's, every civilization has something that makes it special, that makes it unique. And yeah, I think terrace farming was cool because it was very practical. And it was a necessity. The roads, again, very practical and a necessity, all awesome. But these building centers that you could still go visit to today. But if you're going to visit them today, you're talking about trolley rides that would take you a couple hours to get up through the mountains. You can do helicopter rides. But again, 1,000 years ago, those things weren't options. People were taking pack animals, whether they had alpacas, or that they were walking up themselves or bringing the materials themselves, really just kind of shows the marvel of the time period. So hopefully you guys can kind of appreciate some of the beauty that this is. So guys, these next few slides really just wanted to illustrate some of the different characteristics of the Inca culture. Again, the fact that they are polytheistic, they have their established religion, they have different social classes between males and females, upper class, lower class, expectations, these incredible building monuments, they have writing systems. So when the Europeans, again, when they just show up and they have this very distorted view of where they are, again, we really just kind of look at the Europeans as, not willing to accept or understand new cultures, but rather are just looking to exploit those cultures. But as always, all good things have to come to an end. So we're going to see the emergence or the arrival of the Spanish in the year 1531, and it's going to be led by another conquistador by the name of Francisco Pizarro. So Pizarro is going to show up with 180 men. They're going to have the better weapons. They're going to have horses. These European conquistadors, they're going to show up in full battle regalia, with metal plates and armor, and it's going to, guys, again, I use this analogy all the time, but this literally would have been like seeing an alien land outside of our classroom, walk out of his spaceship firing laser photons. Like it's not something that we would ever believe to be true. And the Americans, the Incas, were kind of left in a little bit of like shock and awe. But again, it's not going to be the armor, it's not going to be the horses, it's not going to be the guns that are going to lead to the downfall of the Inca civilization. Unfortunately, again, we're going to see that title fall to disease. Smallpox, is going to ravage the Inca civilization. And as a result, the people of the Inca people, they get very frustrated. There's going to be a civil war that breaks out. And as a result, it was the perfect situation for Pizarro to seize power. And then once he seizes power, he's then going to take the Inca civilization and turn it into a European colony. And then what we're going to find out of that European colony is that after the Europeans decide to settle there, they're going to find a natural resource that nobody was anticipating, and that was actually going to be silver. The Spanish are going to mine more silver out of South America than anyone had ever imagined, and it drastically, drastically changes the entire world's economic system. But none of that happens unless the Inca people were destroyed by these conquistadors showing up for wealth and power, bringing with them disease that no one had an immunity to, and then finding themselves in this perfect opportunity to seize power, seize control, and then, guys, all this is it's just going to solely benefit the Europeans in every way, shape, and form. And that's one of the ugly things that we see, which leads to the downfall of these civilizations. So guys, what we're going to do for the next 2 weeks or so is we're actually going to dive into a project where you guys are going to be doing some research on the Mayas, the Incas, and the Aztecs. Now, everything in this video, the PowerPoint slides, it's just a very, very brief overview. I was only scratching the surface of what was unique about these civilizations. So I'm going to give you guys time to be able to research and really find out some unique things about each one of these civilizations, and you're going to be putting it into a slides presentation. So I'm going to lay all this out on Google Classroom for you, due dates, etc. But please feel free. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, issues, or concerns. I wish you guys all the best. It looks like the weather's going to start to get nicer again, so that'll be cool. Nobody likes snow in May. And guys, just keep working hard. I know that this isn't the easiest situation to be in, and it's an unfortunate way to end our school year. But sometimes you just have to play the cards that you were dealt and make the best of it. So please keep working hard. If you have any questions, issues, if things come up, please do not hesitate to reach out. Send me an email, and we can go from there. All the best. Stay healthy. Stay safe. Bye-bye.